Testing. Testing, 1, 2.
Hey, Pastor. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? What's happening, Charlie? Can you hear me? Shake your head if you can. Charlie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
Charlie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I guess the pastor must be talking to somebody else. Well, Charlie, how you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. I just heard day before yesterday that one of the members of the Raleigh church has been in the ICU, but I understand he's doing a lot better now. Charlie Jones.
Well, good. Charlie Jones?
Yes.
I might know him by face, but I don't know him by name.
Yeah. He's married to used to be Sandra Morgan. Marsha Olds, his brother-in-law.
Oh, okay.
If you was to see him, you'd know who I was talking about.
Okay.
Big stocky, robust guy.
Okay. Not ringing any bells. That don't mean anything. Hello, Robbie.
Hey, how do you see me, Glenn? I'm way back here.
You're behind that. Hey, you remember how your mother always used to tell you got eyes in the back of your head? Well,
Yeah, I mean,
I can look.
I didn't know.
I can look around, Charlie, and behind that house, and I know you're there.
I'm here. I'm just going crazy, okay?
Well,
You know
I'm
where
tired of all this, Glenn.
do you know where
Yeah,
that
we
house
are
is
too.
located?
now I thought that was your house.
No, that house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
That's our
Baton Rouge.
Yes.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, she was her and her husband were, the courts were all closed down there, and they were both in I guess quarantine, and they had just got back from over, and when all this started, they were over in England, and they got out. They had to cut their vacation short by about 4 or 5 days, and they just barely got to come back to the United States. And
Oh,
right
wow.
after that, they were putting mulch down around their flower beds around the house. And she sent me this picture of the before and after of the flower beds.
Oh, okay. I take it this is the after, right?
Well, no, this is actually.
Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study. And we are streaming tonight to both YouTube and Zoom. Those of you on YouTube, we are going to drop that feed after we have the Bible study. And then for those on Zoom, just stay with us and we will have some time of discussion. We'll talk about the study for this evening, as well as just to share some things that are happening in the church and to have a brief discussion on what's taking place in our lives. So we would encourage you to, if you're on YouTube and you'd like to switch over to Zoom after the Bible study, please feel free to do that. If you're on Zoom, please stay on Zoom, and after the Bible study, we'll have a discussion. Well, as you know, of course, we've been looking at Bible prophecy, but we've been looking at Bible prophecy in the broad sense, not in that narrow tunnel that usually we view prophecy through, and that is, the study of the books of Daniel and Revelation and how they go together. And that's an important study. But we're looking at the broader issue of Bible prophecy. And we've been going down through the Bible, picking out, starting back in the book of Genesis, going down through the Bible, picking out various prophecies and looking at those and trying to understand what the fulfillment of those prophecies are, how they were fulfilled in the New Testament writings, and how they will be fulfilled in the future. And so we're continuing to look at that. The last couple of weeks, we looked at some prophecies in the Psalms. And of course, those prophecies that we looked at dealt with the coming Messiah. And tonight we're going to pick up on the same theme, except now we're going down a little bit farther in the Bible from the Psalms down to the book of Isaiah. As most of you know, the book of Isaiah is one of the major prophetic books that we have in the Bible. I love the book of Isaiah, tremendous book, full of prophecy. In fact, as we know, Isaiah is called one of the major prophets. We have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others that are known as the major prophets. And then we have those smaller books in the Old Testament known as the minor prophets, because the prophecies were not nearly as extensive, of course. So we're looking at Isaiah, which certainly is a major prophetic book of the Bible. Tonight, we're going to pick up on the same theme, though, where we were last week, and that is a prophecy in Isaiah concerning the coming of Messiah. This is a prophecy that no doubt many of you are familiar with. We've read these passages many times. They're great passages of the Bible. So we're going to start in the book of Isaiah, and we're going to look now at Isaiah 53. This is a prophecy that, as I mentioned, many of you know very, very well. And we're going to go right to verse 1 of Isaiah 53. Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Now let's go to the New Testament, to the book of John. And here in John, we're going to see how the New Testament now uses that verse in the Old Testament. Once again, we're looking at Isaiah 53 tonight. Isaiah 53, one of those significant messianic prophecies of the Old Testament. And here in John, we see this. By the way, it's also repeated in Matthew, but here it is in John. Though he has done so many signs before them, they still did not believe him, so that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And so here we see John now using this prophecy concerning Jesus and making application of this passage that we just noted in Isaiah 53. Continuing on now, John chapter 12. Therefore, they could not believe. For again, Isaiah says, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him, that is the Messiah. So what he's saying, what John is saying here is that Isaiah saw the Messiah, and Isaiah then gave this message about Messiah. All right, Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and he spoke of him. Nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in him. But the fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogues. For they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. So we see here Isaiah now talking about this giving this prophecy, John now referring back to this prophecy, even with an explanation about the prophecy, saying this was prophesied by Isaiah, and then he made application of it. He said, many believed, but they were afraid to make the confession about Jesus because they were afraid they would be put out of the synagogue. It brings up a really important issue when we look at this particular prophecy, and that is, the question arises, of course, are we willing to do what's right, even though it may cause us some social discomfort? And this is exactly what we see happening here in this prophecy. Isaiah made this prophecy about Messiah, said that Messiah would not be received, and then it was picked up by John, and John made application to it by how the people received Jesus. They believed on him, I mean the leaders even believed on him, but would not accept him because they were afraid they would be ostracized from the synagogue. All right, now going back into the Bible, and we will go now back to the book of Isaiah. This is verse 2. For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, in no beauty that we should desire him. Now, unlike the images that we normally see, we discover here that Isaiah said that Jesus would not be a person that would be physically attractive. Now, as you may know, back a few years ago, there were those that did this image of Jesus based on archaeological data. Now, it's not really about Jesus, but it's an image of a typical Jewish man in the day of Jesus. And this is what they came up with. We don't know how accurate it is, but it's probably more accurate than anything else that we have, because it gives us a picture now, once again, based on archaeological evidence, about what a Jewish man in the day of Jesus would have looked like. But here, according to Isaiah, not only did Jesus look like a Jewish man, which runs contrary to our normal conception, of Jesus being 6'6" and long hair and blue eyes, the picture. In any case, Jesus wasn't like that. Jesus looked like a Jewish man of his time, but according to Isaiah, he was not an attractive Jewish man. So we're using this picture tonight, not because it particularly represents what Jesus was, but it does represent a particular Jewish person of that day. And so it sort of shocks our mind to visualize Jesus and to think what he was about. But Isaiah now, long before Jesus came, prophesied that Messiah would not be followed because he was physically attractive. And Messiah was to be accepted because he was to be believed and trusted, and we were to have faith in him. So the component of physical attraction, according to Isaiah, was removed from the life of Messiah. All right, now let's go back once again into the book of Isaiah, and we're going to pick up on another passage. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrow and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond any human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. Now, going to the book of Mark in chapter 9, and as they were coming down to the mountain, he charged them to tell no one. All right, now this is the experience of Jesus having been up now on the Mount of Transfiguration. Coming down from that, Jesus made now this charge. He gave these instructions to his disciples. Now they were to tell no man what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, why do the scribes that first say that Elijah first must come? And he said to them, Elijah does come first to restore all things. Now, here Jesus is quoting, you see it in the yellow, Jesus is quoting from the book of Isaiah, from this passage that we looked at. And how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? And then he continues on. He says, but I tell you that Elijah has come and that they did to him whatever it pleased them, as it is written of him. All right. So we see now that Jesus took this prophecy of Isaiah, and Jesus himself made application of this prophecy from Isaiah. So it's not just that we have the interpretation of the Bible writer, but we see Jesus himself now using Isaiah 53 to make application and to try to help people understand in his day that he was the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies concerning Messiah. Surely he is, this is verse 4 now in Isaiah 53. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Once again, that whole idea of the suffering Messiah. Now, going to Matthew, we see Matthew 8:16, Matthew also picking up on this idea. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed with demons. He cast out the spirits in a word, and he healed all who were sick. Now, it's interesting here how Matthew makes application of this prophecy that was given back in Isaiah. Notice what Matthew does with it. He says, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. So here we see that Matthew takes the healing ministry of Jesus, and Jesus, as it were, taking our diseases, as Jesus now bearing our diseases, as it was indicated back in the book of Isaiah. So that's the application now that Matthew was making of that particular verse here in the prophecy of Isaiah. All right, moving on now down into Isaiah 53 verse 5. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. Now we're going to the book of Romans, and we see how Paul here picks up on this idea that we saw just expressed. And by the way, I should mention that we're not going to look at every verse with a verse, every verse in Isaiah 53 with a verse in the New Testament, because some of these are just generically known. We don't need to make a specific application. So we're looking at some specific passages, but we also just in a moment going to see these are things obviously that we know from the gospel story. We don't need to match a particular passage. But here, let's go back to the book of Matthew now, or book of Romans, I'm sorry, this is the Apostle Paul. That is why his faith was counted to him as righteousness. He's talking about Abraham, and Abraham now received his righteousness because not of what he had done, but because it was given to him. That same idea, of course, that we have here in Isaiah, that our righteousness comes from Jesus and what he did for us. All right, verse 23 now, but the words it was counted to him were not written for his sake alone, but for ours also. It will be counted to us who believe in him who raised from the dead Jesus our Lord, who was delivered up for our trespasses and raised for our justification. So we see that Paul here is utilizing that concept that we saw back in Isaiah 53. All right, going on now to verse 6, we have Isaiah saying this, all we like sheep have gone astray, and each has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. All right, so we're all familiar with that concept that we have turned away from God. This, by the way, is not a concept that we find just in one place in the Bible, but we find it, of course, in many places in these Bible prophecies, that our iniquity is not counted against us, because when we have belief and faith in the Messiah, his redemption does away with our sin. And so we see this, of course, being expressed here in Isaiah 53. So it's something that we're already familiar with. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. And that is reminiscent, of course, of Jesus going to trial and not responding. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that before his shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgments, he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? So the question is asked here, when Jesus died, how many people even noticed or cared? And that's really a good question. Probably not all that many, especially in comparison with the population of the world and even the population of Palestine, or even more particularly, the population of Jerusalem. Very few of those people probably even knew that Jesus had died. Very few of them paid any attention to it. And so here we see Isaiah raises that issue, that when he died, when he suffered, how many even took notice of what had happened? By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? Now, here we see Acts, and we see this passage of scripture recorded here in Acts, picking up on this thought of these last few verses that we just looked at. In fact, this is a great story. This is one of the really fantastic stories of the Bible. Probably many of you know it. And that is that an eunuch from Ethiopia was there reading the prophecy of Isaiah, but he didn't understand it. And so Philip, one of these followers of Jesus, came along. Philip came along and he asked this man, this Ethiopian, if he knew and understood what he was reading. And the man said, well, no, I don't. I need somebody to help me with this. And so Philip then gave him the interpretation. And so we see now that this prophecy from Isaiah was being read by this man that didn't quite understand what it was all about, probably had never heard of this man, Jesus, and had no idea about his link to the messianic prophecies. And so Philip now explains all of this to him. It's sort of like also what happened, remember those two men on the road to Emmaus, when the Bible says that Jesus in his walk began to open the scriptures to them. He went back to Isaiah, no doubt, these prophecies that we've been looking at, and he opens now the Bible message to these men so that they can see the prophecies of the Old Testament, and they don't just take his word for it. They now are able to identify those prophecies with the life of Jesus as the Messiah. So we see the same thing happening now as Philip begins to explain to this man what had taken place and how the prophecy of Isaiah had been fulfilled. And so he now quotes to him from what he was reading, what this man was reading, Isaiah 53. Now, this passage of the scripture is what he was reading. Like a sheep that was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before his shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life has been taken away from the earth. And eunuch said to Philip, about whom, I ask you, does the prophecy say this? About himself or about someone else? Now, this is rather observant of this Ethiopian. He no doubt was a Bible student, but he had this question. He said, was Isaiah talking about himself, or was he talking about someone else that was going to come? Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with the scriptures, he told him the good news about Jesus. And so we have now Philip sharing with the Ethiopian the message of Bible prophecy to help the Ethiopian understand how that these messianic prophecies were fulfilled in the life of Jesus. That's, of course, what we're looking at this evening and considering the same thing. All right, let's go back now to the Bible. Once again, back to the book of Isaiah. This is down to verse 9 now of Isaiah 53. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. All right, all of us know now the circumstances in the life of Jesus. When Jesus died, Jesus did not have a tomb to be buried in. And so he was now buried by two men, two wealthy men, one Joseph of Arimathea and the other Nicodemus. All right, so let's go now to the book of Matthew, and we see the description here. It's not a quotation from Isaiah, but it's a description of the fulfillment of that prophecy. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was a disciple of Jesus. And he went to Pilate, and he asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut out of the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb, and he went away. All right, so here we see, of course, the very direct fulfillment of this Bible prophecy, and how that this rich man has been described in Isaiah, now gave his burial place to Jesus. All right, let's go back to the Bible now, back to Isaiah. This is 53 verse 10. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will divide him a portion with many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Remember, Jesus, of course, was buried between the two thieves. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for transgressors. So here we have this wonderful prophecy in Isaiah 53, this prophecy about the coming Messiah, about what the Messiah would do and how redemption would take place. Remember now, we're going back something like 800 years before Messiah. And so this is a fantastic Bible prophecy describing what would happen to Messiah. And we see now how this prophecy in Isaiah 53 was recognized as a messianic prophecy, a prophecy about the coming Messiah, both by Jesus and the New Testament writers in the gospel. And also we saw some in the Apostle Paul, and also with Philip in the story recorded there in the book of Acts. So the New Testament, of course, gives testimony to this being a messianic prophecy. But when you study the prophecy and you look at it, it becomes evident that this is a forward-looking prophecy. It's not the only one of this kind in the Old Testament, as we know, but this is certainly one of those forward-looking prophecies talking about the coming of Messiah and giving to us some description of what the life of Messiah would be like and how the life of Messiah would bring redemption for the human race. So there's another one of the Old Testament prophecies. Remember, we're looking now at a broad span of Bible prophecy. This is the first one that we're looking at in Isaiah. We're going to spend some time in Isaiah. We won't be able to go through the whole book. As we go through these prophecies, of course, we have to pick and choose and skip a lot of material. But we're going to spend some time in Isaiah. There's some fantastic prophecies in Isaiah. Not all of those, of course, deal with the Messiah. Many of them deal with other things, and we'll look at some of those prophecies. So next week, when we come back for our Bible study, we'll come back once again into the book of Isaiah, and we'll take a look there at what is being shared in the book of Isaiah prophetically. So be with us next week for more Bible study as we pick up on the book of Isaiah once again. And we hope this evening that God will bless you. This prophecy, I know, is one of those inspirational prophecies. It gives us hope and encouragement. And so I hope that this has been some enlightenment and also comfort to each of us as we have looked at this prophecy together. Now, those of you on Zoom, stay with us. Those of you on YouTube, We're going to leave YouTube in just a moment. So if you'd like to go over to Zoom and be part of the discussion, certainly feel free to do that. All right. Thank you once again. Those of you on YouTube, have a good evening. Those of you on Zoom, stay with me. And we are going now to drop the YouTube feed.